right, thank you for the waiting. Again, big thank you for guys to joining this webinar. My name is Feixiang. I'm the Senior Threat Intelligence Researcher from Group IB. And today, I want to talk about the new research we put online. The code name is Perswaysion, largely because the hackers has been abusing Microsoft's Sway as a jumping board to conduct a series of very targeted phishing attacks. In this presentation, I will roughly touch base on the publication in case some of the guys hasn't read about it. And what I really want to achieve with this webinar is to talk about the challenges brings in during the investigation. And I also want to share some of the thoughts on the countermeasures in the new trend of such kind of phishing attacks. So let's start. First of all, just a quick intro about Group IB and myself. Group IB is a threat intelligence-driven cyber defense company. We focus on cyber attacks investigation, online fraud, and intellectual property protection. There are three main areas we are currently focusing on. The first is adversary-centric threat intelligence service. This is also the team I am representing. And we also have incident response and a forensic investigation service. And on top of that, Group IB also provides threat detection and prevention technology solution. CertGIP is a member of our first organization, and we are also a proud partner of Interpol and Europol. A little bit about myself. Currently, as I just said, I represent the adversary-centric threat intelligence service in Group IB. I focus on the TTP research. Prior on the current position, I led Checkpoint's mobile threat research. My interest of research was on Android security, system hardening, and mobile platform cyber crimes. As a humble beginning, everybody has a humble beginning. As of mine, my career was started as a fintech engineer, and I used to do a large-scale trading, equity trading platform development for investment banking, and it does give me quite interesting engineer perspective and also financial institution knowledge base. And I am very grateful for that kind of experience. It is very beneficial to the later part of my career. So in this presentation, I would like to talk about four things. First of all is a quick touch base on the Perswaysion attack from a nutshell. And then we will move on to a technical analysis, talking about how the hackers actually conduct the deception operation and how the credentials was harvested, in some of the very interesting aspect in terms of technical perspective. And moving on, I will also touch base on the adversary intelligence. We will talk about who we think was behind and what are their incentives and their organizational operational model. And I would like to finish this webinar with some sharing on the challenges alongside of my investigation, and I also want to talk about some countermeasures against those challenges. Overview. The entire Perswaysion investigation was triggered in one of our incident response investigation. Started from Singapore. The investigation was kicked off in the early February. During the research, we realized that a part of the Singapore victims, it has a larger victim population in the North America continent. When we gather a lot of data and evidence in the wild, we realize it is a very the entire Perswaysion operation has a very interesting chronicle development. It started from a very humble beginning against small and medium United States companies. They are largely some family-based business or small energy companies. And then it moved on to infect more victims in Canada, and it moves on to the central of Europe, and then it slowly moving all the way to the east. It's basically from the west to the east. And then we eventually see Singapore, Hong Kong, and even Mongolia, Japan, to be included in the infection map. The large majority of the victims are focusing on the financial services. We're not looking at the big banks, surprisingly. Instead, we're looking at a frequent appearance of small or medium auditing firms, accounting firms, or private investment firms. As our investigation goes on, we realize such kind of choice of a victim might be a conscious choice, because first of all, small and medium business usually has a rather weaker cyber defense compared to big banks or big organizations. And also, they do carry out a lot of sensitive information and data exchange in the format of email. Hence, choosing such kind of victim makes sense in terms of a investment return of investment point of view to the hackers. And from technical point of view, it is a three-stage operation. First of all, the victim will receive a phishing email that has a legitimate PDF file that is trying to recreate an experience of a Microsoft's authentic file sharing notification. And we find out that this kind of phishing apparently benign email can escape traditional corporate firewall easily, because there is literally nothing suspicious inside. And once the victim opens up the file, and the PDF file will redirect the victim to Microsoft Sway service, and then from the Sway service, the victim will be finally landed onto the actual phishing site, and from there, the victim will be tricked to surrender his or her Office 365 login details. All right, let's jump into the technical aspect of persuasion. First of all, let's just allow me to walk you through from a victim point of view. First of all, on a sunny day, as a normal worker, I just received an email from my trusted business relation saying, hey, Feixiang, I have some file I would like to share with you. Please go to this website and open the file I would like to share with you. As you can see here, there are something odd. This is from a very basic rendering, so there is no fancy stuff. But if you look at the string, it was actually concatenated by the plus sign. This is what we understand later in the investigation, is that it points to some sort of email automation process, and this is one of the early version of emails that gets sent out in some of the programming language. For example, in Perl or in Python, the string concatenation can be done by using the plus sign. We believe that it was a software bug in the early stage of the phishing attack. In the later stage, well, this thing, the plus sign has been fixed, but it is suspicious enough to warn the early batch of the victims. And then, as a victim, he or she will just open up the PDF file that comes in with the email, and it has nothing sensitive. It doesn't ask me anything. It just say my full name and my business partner's full name here, and my business partner's email here. And it just telling me that there is something very sensitive my business partner wanted to share with me, and please click read now. And since my corporate firewall didn't report anything suspicious, well, I'm kind of okay to open it. And also for a trained eye, because thanks to the very rigorous corporate internal training, there are a lot of users nowadays that they will think twice before they click any hyperlinks. In this case, this hyperlink right now will redirect the victim to sway.com, which is controlled by Microsoft. So reputational speaking, there's zero risk here. So when I click the read now, well, actually, sorry, there's something interesting I want to chip in here. Again, in the early investigation, we realized that there was something very interesting in the PDF file. From a naked eye, there's nothing wrong about this file. But in some special tooling, we realized that there are quite a lot of random strings in the PDF file. This is also another sign telling us that this PDF has been generated programmably, and this weird string, we believe, is serving some sort of a watermark to differentiating between one sub-campaign to the other. And then, okay, let me put back my victim hat. So after I click the Read Now button, it actually redirects me to the Microsoft Sway. Here is the core of the deception operation here. The Microsoft Sway service actually has a streamless rendering feature, which means as a third-party user, I can upload a Word file, a PDF file, and Sway service will just render it as if it is a streamless web page of the Sway service. Well, it is very convenient for the day-to-day users. They don't need to download the file. They can just read the shared file. But in this case, it creates some illusion that the file itself is already is representing the official authentic Microsoft file sharing. Because again, when you look at the URL, it's Sway, and it fits into the standard corporate sharing format. It has the name of the file sharer, his email, her email, and the full name of the company. The only suspicious things that a victim would be able to pick up will be some sort of a very weird made with Microsoft Sway and some disclaimers and small icons here. But again, for an untrained day-to-day user, it's a good sell. So at the current stage, during our investigation and our conversation with the victim, we realized that most of people pay a lot of attention on the initial URL they click. But once they establish some sort of reputation, trust, or credibility on the URL itself, that is where the persuasion hit it. This read now is actually a hyperlink that will finally redirect the victim to the hacker-controlled third-party virtual private server. And here we believe it's a straight copy from a Microsoft early version of a Outlook login. With a little bit of digging, especially from the create one hyperlink now, it is actually pointing to Microsoft's authentic MS Live sign up. What's interesting is the revision number here, which is revision number 6.7.6640.0. It is a short-lived revision number that was only used back in July 2016. That period of time by Microsoft. So from this small signature, we realized that at least the front end of the phishing kit has been hanging around, being through multiple development cycles for several years already. And from here, a victim will be putting his or her credentials here and click next, and there you go, the credential is gone. Well, let's take off our victim hat for a while and take a look at the overall structure of a Perswaysion campaign. It has several interesting traits, which I classify them as two aspects. One is counterintelligence techniques, and the other is counter-detection intelligence from a hacker point of view. Traditionally speaking, phishing attack is an art of visual deception. Along the way, we realized that the phishing attack campaigns has been evolving, especially in the past 3 years, from a very technical, immature stand where only single page was presented to the victim to today, as of what Perswaysion has. It is a full server-side, it's a mature server-side modularization that is backed by front-end phishing kit, back-end data server, and also a notification service. Here is the sequence diagram. You'll be able to see it's in the standard format. From a victim browser, when a moment the victim lands on the final phishing website, the victim browser will issue a request to the phishing front end, and the phishing front end, which itself doesn't carry out any suspicious operations. Instead, it will respond to JavaScript, to malicious JavaScript file back to the victim server. And those JavaScript files are in charge of two main things. One is to generate a fingerprint for the victim server, which use timestamp, geolocation, and some mechanism similar to the cookie generation techniques, and combine all this together to generate a unique string. And also, the JavaScript file is in charge of the data submission and the notification trigger in a later stage. So once the ID is generated, the ID will be appended to the URL as a get method. And then the malicious JavaScript file will refer to another backend PHP file called loading PHP, submitting it together with the unique ID that it has been generated in the previous step. And here is a logic. After that is a logic fold. The backend data server will actually check the unique ID of the victim browser. If the ID is already being present on the data backend server, then it will be rejected. Hence, there is no request being shoot out or respond to the victim. But if the unique ID is apparently to be a new ID, then the backend server will respond with a 200 OK ACK back to the victim server, and the victim will be allowed to enter his or her credentials, and the credentials will be submitted by the loading PHP back to the data server, and data server responds OK. Once the ACK has been sent to the victim browser, there is another email request gets shoot out to the notification service. I classified this structure as a fundamentally counterintelligence method. It is because in order for the phishing attack to go on, the unique ID has to be present in the follow-on URL. So there are a lot of modern automated URL scanning tools over there. They usually take or replay the URL a human user has been using and trying to access it again and trying to download a response and analyze it. In this case, all the replay engine we receive is a 503 forbidden, which again will construct a obstacle in terms of auto detection and automated threat intelligence gathering operations from the blue team point of view. The second counterintelligence technique involves in the persuasion campaign is the server-side modularization. As you can see, this is a traffic breakdown of the victim credential harvest request submitted to the backend data server. There are three main things here. First, of course, is the stolen credentials need to be collected, and then it has a sub-campaign name for this is especially for Office 365, and it has an Off 365, and there is another thing here called ID cast. As our investigation goes on, we realize ID cast is actually represent ID of the customer. The customer means it's the customer who purchased this phishing kit from the phishing kit developer and runs the current phishing operation. And this is the email address of the campaign runner, which also is the corresponds to the customer ID here. The email notification is should need to be delivered in time for the purpose of within 24 hours of a post-infection follow-up, which I will elaborate in the later part of the presentation. The benefit of a highly modularized server architecture is that in a traditional automated detection and prevention system, we usually just block or take down the front end of a phishing server. In this case, if the phishing front end server is taken down, the continuity of the entire phishing operation is not broken down. The hacker could easily just spin off yet another phishing front end server, and there we go, a new campaign, or even the same campaign that has a very minimum downtime in this sense. And moving on, for the second tier of an interesting technique observation that we have here is the counter detection features. First of all, as I explained in the previous part of the presentation, Perswaysion has a very delicate multi-layer traffic whitewashing First of all, it sends a appearingly benign email with a benign PDF attachment to the victim, so that traditional corporate firewall or auto detection will not be able to catch it. Because let's face it, there's nothing wrong about the PDF itself. And then the persuasion campaign tend to use Microsoft as a jumping board, or internally we call it Marsh, because the hackers actually use not only Sway service. During the wider investigation, we find out that persuasion sub-campaigns sometimes also use OneNote instance and even some free SharePoint demo instance as the jumping board to give the extra credibility of the entire phishing campaign. And then, as contrary to some shady VPS that most of the previous phishing attacks uses, Perswaysion actually use primarily two reputable cloud service provider to host its own front-end phishing application. In the early stage, from around November to about late January 2020, the persuasion campaign primarily used AppSpot, which is a Google-provided cloud service to host the front end of the application. At around late January, thanks to a large-scale Google taken down, the persuasion sub-campaign has eventually moved on to a IBM-provided MyBlueMix as an alternative of the phishing front-end web application host service provider. And besides multi-layer traffic whitewashing, we also observe there are growing different number of proliferation for persuasion. Persuasion campaign started with email-centric proliferated campaign. In a general sense, it constructs a very typical chain reaction. First, it infects someone with a small business from a small business with a fairly weak cyber defense. Sometimes there is no cyber defense at all, and use that victim to actively analyze his or her business relation and pick up something slightly bigger. For example, during our investigation, we realized one of the strain was actually started from a European home designer small office, and the home designer victim can't get compromised. And one of the auditor happened to be the home designer's customer, and the auditor become the second victim, and the auditor in return it has been doing some business interaction with a private investment fund in the United States, and then there goes the private fund manager became a third victim of the whole reaction chain before it actually gets discovered and the entire chain gets killed off. At around early March 2020, our investigation actually realized that there are more and more victims actually gets infected from instance messaging sharing, for example, Slack. And here is a sample of a Slack proliferated phishing URL that actually points to the Sway page and fall on to MyBlueMix and fall on to the phishing site itself. And here is a screenshot of how it looks like when some of the Perswaysion sub-campaign actually use OneNote as a jumping board to actually land the victim into the final phishing site. And in this sense, the URL is embedded in a view document. Another interesting aspect of Perswaysion entire operation is its very tied up follow-up steps. In a conventional sense, phishing attacks normally just trying to achieve maximum number of victims and gets as many credentials as possible. And those credentials will be packaged up and sold in bulk to the next threat actors who are specialized in data screening, data cracking, or sometimes involves in password cracking practice. But in Perswaysion, the sub-campaign runner actually has a very persistent short period of follow-up actions that is guaranteed, almost guaranteed, within 24 hours. First of all, I use the T to denote the actual timestamp when the victim submit his or her credential to the phishing campaign. There are three main steps gets involved in the follow-up operations. First is the initial recon operations, which typically happen after 6 hours of initial infection. It depends on the time zone. This number actually coming from our investigation in the Asia area. It may vary when it comes to the victim in the US or in Canada. So after 6 hours, the hackers actually connects to victim's Office 365 server using IMAP protocol and trying to try and validate whether the credential is valid or not. If the credential actually ends up with a successful login, at around 7 hours mark, there will be a start of mass data dumping via IMAP protocol and what we believe is a programmable operation. And after that, at around 21 hours to 24 hours, we observe the evidence of victim impersonation. At this point of time, the evidence shows that the hackers actually has already sought out the general business relation by dipping through the victim's email contents that gets dumped in the second step, and already has a idea of who are the next batch of the victim that they would like to work on. So there will be several impersonating phishing emails using current victim's account gets sent out to the next batch of business partners. Our investigation shows that external business partners are mostly preferred for two reasons. One is to minimize the possibility of detection, because generally speaking, the Perswaysion hacker trying to invest as fewer people within the same organization as possible, because the more victim gets infected or compromised in the same organization, the greater probability that this campaign gets detected. And second, external business relation to the current victim usually has some incentive to open up the email. For example, in typical relation, we see a lot of things like auditors sent to external business partners who has been using the auditing service. We also see small investment groups interaction and sending out impersonating phishing emails to their customers who has a fund invested in the private investment fund. So after talking about the technical side, I would like to walk you through and share some of the adversary intelligence we have been gathering along our 4 months of investigation. As most of the phishing campaigns, Perswaysion campaign also has a very immature beginning. As what we understand that at the beginning of the phishing attack, Perswaysion campaign, the attackers has a very limited fund, so they want to save money as much as possible. So instead of hosting the malicious JavaScript file, they actually uploaded the JavaScript to a free JavaScript hosting service called myjavascript.com or .org. And the earliest version of malicious JavaScript file can be found and traced back to the early October back in 2019 and under the name of Adrian. And this timestamp is what we believe first gets kicked off and used to attack the early small business in United States. And here is a group of different sub-campaign runners who control different email accounts based on the malicious JavaScript file email notification functions. And on the horizontal row, it represents the different code name of the variants of different Perswaysion phishing kit. As you can see, there are 20-ish groups here. Based on our investigation, we can actually correlate 5 groups who historically has interaction with each other. Here is the Anua gang and the Bill gang, and also a Robert group and a Quality group. In the later part of this presentation, when I talk about some of the challenges, I would like to share about the challenge on the modern threat intelligence landscape, thanks to very loosely related cybercrime relations compared to the previous very tight coupled interaction in between the hackers. This actually creates a lot of problems when we're trying to do attack attribution and sometimes threat actor tracking as well. And among all different attacking groups, we believe Anua group is actually the very first Perswaysion campaign runner who purchased the phishing kit from a phishing developer and actually participated in the early version of phishing kit testing in Devil as well. And Anua group has actually created a dummy LinkedIn profile. In the later stage of the investigation, we believe that this LinkedIn profile was used to do business relation recon to figuring out the official post of the new victim and what are the possible high-ranking officers in the same organization that Perswaysion hacker can actually leverage and gets greater chance of infection and greater return value. In a nutshell, we believe that Anua is actually a a small group coming from Nigeria who has been using a Chinese, a very popular Chinese brand phone among Nigerians called Tecno Camel CX phone, and this phone is actually using as a second 2FA authenticator to the Gmail account. And an Anua Gmail account historically has been used to register a Skype account, which in return runs a fake electronic shop around 2016 and 2017 to conduct a very low level of sophisticated online shopping scam, which actually promised the delivery of very cheap electronic goods, but once they receive the funds and there will be no goods gets actually delivered. And this shopping scam website was taken down in early period of 2017, and from there, the Anua group actually find out a way to connect with its counterparty in Johannesburg of South Africa, and from there we believe these two small groups has joined venture in terms of purchasing a slightly more sophisticated phishing kit, which currently we know as a Perswaysion, from a developer, from a phishing software developer, and in return they put their scam operational experience into place and run the phishing attacks as if it's early endeavor of online shopping scams. After some of the tracking, we believe that the Anua, again, one of its leader actually goes by the nickname of Sam, who sold some Toyota Jeep and some real estate around 2015 and 2017 on the internet. And this is as far as what we went in terms of Anua subgroup attribution. Among different variants of persuasion campaign, we actually find out some extra interesting language in tricks embedded in the persuasion phishing kit. In the front end, we actually see a frequent representation of alerts written in Vietnamese. The first part is a user-specific alerts, and the second part is focusing on the developer mode. And here, the third part is also a developer-specific debug message saying, okay, this is part of the code that is representing the height of the window. And from these three pieces, we believe that the original Perswaysion phishing kit developer has actually have some Vietnamese-speaking backgrounds, and very possibly the work of some freelancer Vietnamese developers out there. In the recent phishing variant, we actually discovered two interesting fonts rendered. One is Microsoft Yahe, and the other is Microsoft Jinhe. Yahe is a Microsoft created simplified Chinese font. It's largely targeted at China mainland audience, and Jinhe is a font that is commonly seen in Hong Kong, Taiwan, sometimes. From here, we believe that this phishing campaign is actually trying to get to Chinese speakers in the next wave of the attack. And here comes to the last part of my presentation. After all the maybe boring technical sharing, I would like to actually share some challenges and some of the thoughts on the countermeasurements alongside of my investigation. There are, generally speaking, Perswaysion campaign has presented a huge problem in terms of a traditional threat intelligence and hacker attribution process. As I show you in the previous slides, there are roughly more than 20 loosely connected campaign runners. They are not really connected to each other in a command and control or very organizationally traditional organizational way. Instead, they are just a group of different hacker customers who happen to purchase the same phishing kit from the same phishing kit provider. And Perswaysion, given the nature of a highly targeted nature, each of the PDF file gets sent out or received by the victim different. During my early communication with different organizations or groups, the very first thing I was asked about is, can we have SHA code of the IOC of the phishing files? I said, no, I'm sorry, it just doesn't work, because each of the PDF will have different URL, different name, different email address in the text, so SHA doesn't really work. But instead, since it's a phishing campaign, I took a slightly different perspective when it comes to the detection route. Phishing campaign needs to recreate the authentic user experience, and largely they rely on the icon or image portion of the PDF. So instead of getting the SHA list, I recommend to look into the binary, unique binary signatures in the actual PDF or phishing campaign image instead of the overall SHA or maybe some of the CNC connections. Because again, Perswaysion has a very flexible and elastic modularized server structure. It doesn't hurt much if a single front-end URL gets blocked. They just spin off yet another instance, possibly within a minute or so. So in summary, image signature can play a very useful and unique detection capability in terms of the counter phishing attacks. And second, I realized that the de-anonymization of the threat actors in current cloud era is very hard. First of all, is the infrastructure. Previously, it requires the threat actor has a good level of technical sophisticated skills. At least they need to understand how to spin off a server, how to deploy a web application. But in this case, in a very specialized underground market, there are people specialized in kit development. There are people are specialized in building the infrastructure, managing the cloud instance, and there are group that is specialized in running the actual campaign from a human point of view. So given that, it creates a lot of obstacles. For example, all of the cloud service provider, for example, AWS, Amazon, IBM, they have a very stringent privacy term, which actually hide the actual service buyer or cloud instance owner from the researchers like myself. And on top of that, DNS records are largely dominated by the hide my name service. And in a lot of instances, all we can see is the cloud service provider name instead of the actual domain owner's name. In answering that, I would like to propose a web triad, which in summary consists of 3 attributes: weapon, enemy, and business model. In a traditional threat actor-centric threat intelligence, we want to understand who is the enemy and what is their TTP, and can we bring in a lawsuit that requires the actual pinpoint of the enemy. But given the challenge presented in Perswaysion, I would actually argue that nailing down the real identity of all the enemies out there, adversaries out there, requires a large amount of resource and time investment that is so big that it does not even render an appropriate level of return. And then there comes to the traditional detection of malware detection, URL detection. That is the weapon part of the triad. We have spent a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of human resources on the weapon. But in order to have an effective detection or countermeasurement, given that it becomes largely difficult to do a pinpoint, accurate threat actor attribution, I would really to emphasize the importance to understand the business model of the adversary. You can view the entire phishing campaign, or even in a general sense, a cyber attack, a commercial cyber attack campaign, as a organized cyber commercial company. Individuals within our cyber criminal organization can be replaced easily, but it is the business model. How does the organization profit? How do they do the cash out? What are the valuable things can help these commercial grade cyber criminals to gain benefit? All these kind of business models take time to build. And once we understand the business model of the phishing campaign or other cyber attacks, it will give us the better understanding in terms of, one, how can we make ourselves or make our digital assets less appealing to this business model, so that the hackers actually find out a very minimum incentive to hack us. And second, as a law agencies or reinforcement, in understanding the business model, we can actually block certain part of the joint operation. For example, can we cut off the cash out? Can we monitor the development of the business relation in between different groups, and things like that. Finally, I would like to talk about the difficulties of, in general, to detecting phishing campaigns in time. A lot of time, phishing campaign detection can be post-incident detection, meaning we always see some victims, then only after that we start to realize there are some phishing campaigns out there. What I see phishing campaign is essentially a large operation of plagiarism. For example, Perswaysion actually copied the entire front page of Microsoft Outlook back in 2015, 2017. And they didn't change anything. So this can be a very interesting perspective if we view this as a copyright protection. We can actually adopt some of the traditional copyright traps that actually we can program some very bizarre or unique substrings, or include small signatures as a small invisible element of the website. For example, if I am a bank, I can put some absurd strings in my front page. So when the phishing hackers want to copy my front site and become their front site, we can actually tell somebody is copying from me. And there are a lot of things we can do from there. For example, if Google picks up the phishing website, and we can do a periodical search on the bizarre string we embedded it as a copy traps. If the bank sees something pops up other than its own legitimate front page, and that is a huge big red alert saying somebody is copying my front page, and we should work on the early intervention, or even engage in the takedown services as a countermeasurement to the early warning and early detect of phishing attacks. All right, so that brings to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. I think we are right on time. If you have some questions, feel free to contact our team and our marketing and PR team, and I am more than happy to have a follow-up conversations, especially on the countermeasurements, maybe on the technicality stuff, and also as a general consensus of a researcher, I'm always open to follow-up collaborations with you guys. And thank you very much for joining in this Wednesday. Appreciate your participation.